Hi everyone, thanks for being here. I'm proud to bring Chris Larson here to the forum today to get us caught up on all the important things that are happening in the Capitol. He continues fighting for us up there, and I'm very proud to have him here today. Without further ado, here's Chris Larson.
Thank you, fellow UUs. It's good to be. I think I broke the mic already. I'm not touching that. Okay. Good morning.
Good morning.
It's so good to be here with you guys. It's like the entire coffee hour moved upstairs. I will say I don't have the PowerPoint just because as I was preparing the normal things that I've done for town halls of outlining different state issues, I realized none of that is what anybody from this church has been asking me about. So I'm happy to go in and I will do that, but I first wanted to kind of open by just talking about the place where we're at as not just a state, but as a country. Oh, there you go, thank you. I will know that. About where things are at overall. And I think it's worth starting by talking about my favorite movie, which is Back to the Future. We actually got a little thing on our car that display broke, and we replaced it with a substitute that looks like the inside of the DeLorean. So for those of you that know the movie, you know the DeLorean is the time machine. And it's my favorite because you can think about going back and what you would do and changing those things. We don't have a time machine, right? And reading about history about what's going on in other countries, they didn't have a time machine, although there's lots of plots of different movies that go back into, you know, pre-Nazi Germany or go into Nazi Germany and about how, you know, you could go in and intervene in a different way. Or before, you know, authoritarianism took over Hungary or Italy or within Russia. But we are where we are right now. And we can do things now to be able to push back against what's going on. And I know that there is a temptation to try and absorb as much news as you possibly can to be able to fully understand it. It is impossible to be able to absorb everything that's going on. And you should not feel guilty about not being able to absorb all of it. It is on purpose. It is what Steve Bannon has called muzzle velocity, which is just to be able to hit things over and over and over and over. So if you feel overwhelmed, I understand that, but to be able to make sure that you're pushing back in whatever way you find acceptable. I think the way, or comfortable. And I've been saying that repeatedly to folks, to think about what the outer edge of your comfort level is and find your way to that point as quick as you can. You know, and I get that as somebody who is surrounded by introverts, that it's easy to be able to say, well, I'll do anything that I can without talking to other people. And you'd be surprised how many folks have come to me over the years. I've been a state senator now for 14 years, congregation number before that. But the people who are, whatever I do not to talk to people. Unfortunately, that is how we learn. That is how people learn. And so facts and statistics and history may all be on our side, but facts and history and statistics do not have charming personalities or legs or faces, but you do. And so being able to carry these things out there in the world is what's going to actually make the difference. And I think that's worth saying right up front from the beginning. If we're waiting for other folks to do the right thing, history has shown that we'll be waiting until it's too late. Things are bad, and they're getting worse every day that goes by. Lately I've come to realize, as many of you might have too, is that no one else is coming to save us. The national leaders that we look to for guidance are not coming. They're not equipped to handle what's coming from, they're not equipped to handle the corruption that's coming from the top. Worse though, is that I don't think anyone else really has the answer of what to do. And I think it's worth recognizing where we are too, that if we had the answer, we would clearly be calling for our leaders to do that one thing, that one specific thing. However, what I do believe is that despite that, we should still each act to the absolute limit of what we're capable of. We each have a lot of power, that whether we realize it or not, and now is the time to use it. We do have friends who listen to us. Each of you in this room have friends who listen to you. You may be a little bit more political than they are, but you've been able to maintain your friendship regardless, maybe despite of that or in light of that. And some of them may not vote the same way that you did, which I think is actually better, because it gives you the chance to be able to give them that guiding Unitarian on-ramp to be able to, without judgment, see where they're coming from. And I implore you to do it as best you can by asking questions. It's really hard to be able to say right away, to recognize somebody. And we have friends. I can tell the story. If this were online, I'd give a person's name, but I have close friends. My wife is in the back and she knows exactly who they are. Friends in our very inner circle who either didn't vote or voted the opposite way that we did in the last election. And they're still close friends. And the way to not change a person's mind, as I'm sure you know, is to start the conversation by saying, you are wrong for the following reasons. If somebody said that to you, you know exactly how the guards would go up. But it takes that extra second of pause to ask the question, what inspired you to do that, or what caused you, what was the pathway, and try to listen, right? And then to be able to dive into those questions about what specific things, have those changed? Do you still feel that way? Because, and I think it's an important thing to have that patience, because it's the only way a person's mind changes. I believe that if you end up playing the game 20 questions, if you ever played that as a kid, or if you have kids, we play it in the car all the time. By the time you get, from the first question to the end, right? Most of the time, unless it's our family, we get them on the first two because we're used to saying ones over and over. But for most cases, it takes all those questions to try and get to the point where a person has something in their heads specifically. And it may take those 20 questions to be able to get to that for your friend, for your relative, for your neighbor, but you have to go through it. And in the end, you might find that one thing to be able to get a person to actually think about where they're coming from. If you had to generalize on where folks are at, and if you don't have that person in your life, I encourage you to make new friends, find new circles, because that's how we're going to change things. The folks that I have that are in my life that did vote for the current president, but not to generalize, but a lot of them feel like the system wasn't working for them. And they don't follow all of the details of how politics ends up working. I represent, by the way, from not just here on the east side, but Bayview, where I live, St. Francis, Cudahy, South Milwaukee, and all of Oak Creek. And I did represent a part of Franklin and I now represent a part of Greenfield. So a wide spectrum of folks. The vast majority of people within that do not identify with one party or another, right? They end up identifying with the issues of their neighborhood, the issues of their school. They identify with their community more than they identify with a particular national party. But they know that they feel like things are not working. They don't understand why. They feel like they've been left behind from the social contract, many of them. Specifically folks who are my age and younger, a lot of students or recent graduates. They feel that the contract that said that if you go to college, and it will pay for itself. They were told that the economy will improve, you'll be able to find a job and you'll be able to afford a car and a place to live and a family. For many folks that has proved to be not true. Where if they went to college, they have a mounting debt that has followed them around for the decade or decades since. They feel that it's a matter of that is stopping them from being able to start the family and live the life that they've always wanted to. And so when people end up stepping forward and saying, well, we're going to defend how things are, or they feel like it's defending the status quo, which has not worked for them. And so being able to create a different vision and to be able to talk about how things could be and should be is a way to be able to have that turning point with them. They want it fixed. They don't want to fix it. They want somebody to do that. So there's a deep temptation to having someone else to just go and fix it. But that's the harsh realization to think that if you're attending a sports rally or a sports game, and to find out that you are not just a spectator, but you are suddenly a participant. And that's where we find ourselves in our country right now, that we are not spectators, that we are not viewers, that we are actually participants in it, and voting is just one piece of that. And thank you for voting, right? That's a big piece of it on Tuesday. And that gives us a reprieve to be able to figure out what's going to be coming next. So the world is changing fast, and a lot of people are getting left behind. And for a lot of folks, they've hit a wall at some point that made clear that that social contract that was for everyone else and has kept things in rhythm was voided and without their consent. It's not clear who to blame for them. If they have time to actually, I think this is important, if they have time to actually think about it at all, because most of the folks don't have the free time that they used to. And you see this in the folks who turn up to volunteer. A lot of people don't have the time to do that because they're honestly overwhelmed. They don't have the free time that they deserve. If they did, frankly, I don't think we would be in much of the mess that we are. So we have no time machine. The time is to do what we can with this now. And I would finish by saying before I take questions and I'll dive into some of the states. That I think one of the books that I find guidance from is on tyranny. So if folks will see a couple of nods, as you can see, it's the least intimidating book that you can find. It is large print with lots of space. 20 points, so it should take you less than a week if you get it from the library. And there is one with pictures at the library. But if you go down to your local bookstore, it's $12 too. So, but this is one that was actually given to me by an intern. Timothy Snyder is a Yale professor, talks about how tyranny had flourished in other parts of the world and what we can do to try and push against it. But it was given to me as a parting gift at the end of one of my interns' tenures with my office, and this was after the last election. He said, "I think you might need this." So it was the case where the intern had learned more than we had expected. And had become the teacher himself. So worth checking out. But one of the big pieces of that is to make eye contact and small talk, which seems like such a small thing, right? Because that's not something they make movies over. That's not something that that you show in heightened roles. But being human and having those pieces to show that you are of empathy opens so many different doorways. So I'll stop at that. And I'll shift over to this state, and then if it's all right to be able to take questions, because I know there's hopefully a lot of pushback or questions and things that we can dive into some of the things that are going on. So on the state level, we're at a strange point right now. So we don't have, not only don't we not have a budget right now as a state, we also don't have an expectation of a budget, which is two different things. So the state comes up with a budget every 2 years. Quick civics background, we work in something called a biennium, which just means every 2 years. And it always happens after the even year election cycle that come into session, and within a month, the governor puts forward his budget. That is presented to the legislature goes through it. There's a committee with the acronym JFC. That stands, there you go, somebody got it. You have grandkids, I'm sure. JFC, which stands for Joint Finance Committee. And they just had their hearing in West Dallas on Friday, and they're supposed to take into consideration where the public's at. And from there, they have 2 more at the end of the month, and then they're supposed to go through the motions, and then that budget is supposed to go through both houses of the legislature and pass into law. That's the 3rd grade version of what's supposed to happen. Now, what has happened is the last 3 budgets that the Governor Evers has presented his budget. It has been promptly stripped of all policy and taken down to the bones. and then build back up. And then the staring match between the governor and the legislature, which had been run for the last 3 cycles by a gerrymandered Republican majority, that staring contest had begun and then ended promptly towards the end of June when the budget is supposed to start, with the governor vetoing some things and then signing it. That has led us to a point where the governor puts a budget that actually has really good things, and I can go through those. $300 million that's going towards mental health within our public schools specifically, going after insurance companies with audits if they have a high rate of refusal to cover care, which is a huge problem. They also, within this budget, is increasing special education reimbursement for public schools up to 60%. Some of us had advocated for 90%. Just to give folks a perspective of what that means, special education reimbursement comes from the state to cover the local expense that would otherwise come from your property taxes or property taxes of the 421 school districts across the state. That means a lot because every public school has to take every student that comes to its doors, which ends up meaning that public schools have twice the population of students with disabilities, with special needs, who require special attention than a private school does on average. And so the state reimburses a portion of that, knowing that requires a lower teacher to student ratio, right? You need more hands to be able to handle this. And if you're wondering what that looks like, I was touring one of my school districts last month, and this is not the first time something like this has happened. We're walking through the hallways, we open a new wing into the younger kids, and you see one kid running down the hallway with his shirt off, and 3 teachers following in their wake. And the principal and the teachers who were giving me a tour didn't even blink, they just looked at me and they were like, yep, this happens. And that's what special education reimbursement covers, is making sure those who come to that child's aid can then guide them back to a point where they're in a position to, using a Wisconsin word, recombobulate and then learn. The state gives reimbursement for voucher schools, 90%. They reimburse 90% of the dollars spent for special education students. In public school, it's 30% that they reimburse. And so if you think about that, every time they're spending $1, they're only getting 30 cents back, which means 70 cents has to come from somewhere else within the school. That has persisted for the entire time I've been a legislator, and we've been trying to push for that every single cycle. So I'm very glad that the governor pushed up to 60%. It was 45% reimbursement in the first year, 60% in the next. The issue is if we do not get to 60%, you're going to see more referendums coming up. If you live in Milwaukee, you know we passed one last year, very narrowly. If you live anywhere else, you probably also have a referendum because they keep coming up. That is not the fault of local school boards, that is the state pushing the burden onto property taxpayers through referendums over and over. And the result is that locals have stopped voting for them. We just had a historic low number of percentage of referendums passed on Tuesday. It dropped below 60% for the first time in 20 years that we've looked. We're still looking back at how low it's, if it's dropped below that. These usually pass at a 90% rate, but people are having what we're calling referendum fatigue. It's a new term. It's like the equivalent of having your neighbor going by to sell candy bars. You know, they're selling for Little League. Which my son will probably be doing here pretty soon. Or you have the Girl Scout cookies that just went out last month. When you see them once a year, you have a larger heart to be able to say yes to them. But if they're coming back every single month, you start to wonder, well, what the heck is going on? You know, why is the system not funded? So that's what's happening. So 60% is what's been advocated for, and a lot of the folks turned up, and some of the folks here were there at the Joint Finance Committee hearing on Wednesday too. So all of that should be in the budget. We're about to find out what they're going to strip out. And the reason we don't know exactly what's happening with it is because there was a lot, was basically because we had new maps. And how is that connected? The legislature actually voted for the maps that we have, that we operated under this last cycle, and the governor signed them. That has given us fairer outcomes, so it's fairer maps. That, there was an attempt, the grand hope was that that would be repealed in the Supreme Court if the election on Tuesday had gone a different way.
Well,
Because it passed the legislature, there was not a judicial precedent. So their hope was what happened on Tuesday would mean that it would go back and they would have the $4 billion surplus to spend on their own and they could do whatever they wanted in the next cycle. Because Tuesday did not go to the Republicans' plan, we have been trying to figure out what they're going to do next. And so this is a time where calling your elected official, having your friends and relatives contact an elected official is going to come into play. A number of people have come up to me and said, well, now that the numbers are closer, Republicans have to be willing to work with you, right? And the answer has been no. And a lot of it had to do with what happened on Tuesday, because they were told to wait and don't work with us until after that. But now that Tuesday has passed, we're not sure exactly what's going to happen. I've had a number of different conversations with my colleagues, and there's a range. So we're about to find out whether a number of people peel off and decide to finally break the fever that our state has had for 14 years and actually work in a bipartisan way on some of these issues, or if there's going to be a number of them that go along with the old pattern of saying just ignore the public comments. Because gerrymandering, that's what gerrymandering does. You're safe enough that you can ignore what the public wants. So I'm hopeful that we move towards the side that says we're actually going to have to work together and get things done, where people have to respond to the public where they had not before. And a big piece of that is that there was 9 seats that changed hands in the state assembly, and there was 4 of them that changed hands in the state senate, which means that the folks who were told, sitting next to the people who are there now, were told you don't have to pay attention to the public are now gone, right? Those people have been removed, and so you don't have as much trust in the folks who are saying you could ignore the public comment. So I'm hopeful that we go down that path, but we'll find out between now and the end of June when the budget is supposed to have to pass. And that's basically the outlines of the budget. So we're waiting to see what's going to end up happening. With that, I'm open to taking questions or guidance if there are specific things folks do want me to talk about in the balance of our time together. Yeah.
What's the author of On Tyranny?
Tim Snyder.
You'll have to repeat, please, all of the questions so that the people online.
Thank you, got it. Okay, the question was, who is the author of On Tyranny? And the author is Timothy Snyder, S-N-Y-D-E-R. Thank you for letting me know. Yes.
It's Republican tax policies for individuals and corporations that is transferring the wealth produced by our economy up to the richest few. Now, by different people who said the economy isn't working for them realize that this is why.
So the question that did not end in a question mark, I will note. Well, I kind of did. Why did they never say it? So he's asking about the tax policy that has transferred a lot of our wealth to the very rich and how it's not working for most people. Why, I guess the question, why are people not understanding, or why is that?
The MAGA people are voting
Yes.
for the people who are, it's their main policy aim to transfer more wealth up to the richest.
Yes, I mean, it is okay, so you're asking, and I want to make sure I'm getting this right, is why are people still voting for that massive transfer of wealth?
They're voting against themselves.
Where they're voting against themselves. So this is, I'll answer in a frustrating way to you. We all vote against our own interests. And that's important, because if we didn't, we would have never passed the Civil Rights Act. If we did not vote against our own interests, we would not be voting to tax all of ourselves, right? right? We would, especially if you are somebody who has never benefited from Medicare, right? Or if you're somebody who does not have a disability, you would not fund a program that has ramps to be able to make sure people who are in wheelchairs can be able to get around. So we all vote against our own interests. It's a matter of what we are willing to do, and there's a value that fills within that. On the tax policy of why we continue to shuffle more money towards the very top, I think a big piece of that is people end up seeing themselves more in the bracket above than they like to think of themselves as being the bracket below. People think that they have commonality with the rich because they feel like that's who they are or that's who they're going to be. And the more that people can realize that we have very little in common with the super wealthy, the more they'll start to realize, wait a second, like these policies are actually taking us back and making that further and further and further away. Because having those conversations, and again, I encourage you to have those conversations directly, don't take my word for it, have a very, take a heavy dose of patience and then go in and ask why people will vote for that. And you'll probably get an answer that's pretty similar to that they feel like as long as they are not the ones directly being screwed over, then they're benefiting. What they're not realizing is they are getting screwed over, but very, very, very slowly, is not upfront. And so they're using a psychological principle, which is to be able to beat up the people underneath you and think that they're coming behind you, instead of recognizing the people on top are pushing you down. That is it. And there's psychological experiments that have shown that. If we did an experiment, probably not in this church, it wouldn't work. But if you did an experiment, you gave everyone $10, and then you gave half the room $10, you gave a smaller set of people $5, a smaller set of people $1, but you gave a handful of people $20, and then you said, okay, you have to give out the money that you got. The money tends to go up. You give it to the people in the tier above you, you don't give it down, especially if giving it to the tier down would mean that person would surpass you. There's a psychological thing that goes on where you tend to think, well, I don't want to be at the bottom. So as long as I'm beating up the people at the bottom, I will never be that. So that's what's going on there. And then to add to it, you add a generous amount of gasoline, a drum-sized amount of gasoline on top of that, fueled by Elon Musk and billionaires to confuse people into saying that yes, the person behind you is the one, the person underneath you is the one who's coming for you and is trying to stop you. One of the stories I always tell is the story of 100 cookies on the table. You have 3 people at the table. You have a working class white guy, you have an immigrant, and you have a rich guy at the table. And the rich guy grabs all 99 cookies, leaving 1 left, but he whispers over to the working class white guy, watch out for that immigrant. Saw him looking at your cookie. And that's what we're dealing with on a wide scale. That's what all the funding was for. And I guess in this case, in the last election, it was subbing out necessarily the immigrant, but with the trans neighbors, saying watch out for them, they're coming for your rights. So hopefully, does that help provide some guidance? Okay. Yes?
Do you think there's any chance that the PSC will listen to the public?
That's a really good question. Okay, so your question was the PSC, which for folks who aren't following everything, is the Public Service Commission. And your question is, will the Public Service Commission pay attention to the public? Public comments. And so I'm guessing you're talking specifically about the transition of the 2 power plants? Yes, okay. So the power plants are being switched from coal burning in Oak Creek to methane burning, which is, coal is the worst. Coal is the worst form of power that you can get, super dirty, and methane is the second worst. So we're moving from what's really bad to one that's slightly less worse. when clean energy is an option. And We Energies that has proposed this. They've also proposed building a new power plant in Paris, Wisconsin, which is southwest of us a bit. All of this is to supply energy to the Microsoft data centers, which do not employ a great amount of people, a great number of folks. And so they're asking us to transition or to create methane burning power plants, which will pollute us in the air that we breathe, to produce energy for these data centers, which helps them someplace far away where they're not breathing the same air as us. So that's the easiest breakdown I can give about what's going on. 80% of the comments at the last public hearing were against this change. I asked both of the public service commissioners who were at that hearing beforehand, because you can't talk about specific cases, but I asked them, I said, why do public service commissioners keep ignoring the public comments? Because is there a certain weight that's given? Because this is, I don't know how many of these I've gone to. I'm usually the only legislator there. There's been a few who've shown up since, which is really good. Senator Carpenter, Senator Warch, Representative Madison. But they tend to pass these things, whether it's a rate increase by We Energies, which we saw double-digit increases through the last 4 years. And on this one, it's long-lasting. This would have a decades-long impact. So I'm hopeful that by contacting them, it does make that change. But just to be clear, all 3 of the public service commissioners were appointed by Governor Tony Evers. So we are trying to have conversations and push the governor to say, hey, these are your appointees. You had a standard of moving to 52% of 52% of our energy coming from renewable sources. That was one of the pledges he made, 52% by 2030 and 100% by 2050. And so we're hopeful that that argument sticks. The public comment period is open for, I think, another few days on both of those, so I encourage you to do that. But yeah, we're paying attention. I think the best that we can do is make sure that the governor knows that we're paying attention to what his commissioners are doing. Does that help answer where you're at? I saw your hand up and we'll look at the others. Yes.
Yes. Is there any possibility that the fair deal for counties is going to come up again in this session or in this budget?
Yeah.
No one has talked about it, and I've tried to tell people that you need to ask your legislators where they stand on it when a county is struggling for funds.
Yeah.
But it's been years, and we built in Milwaukee, built the forum in that amount of time. We have a lot more tax revenue that's gone to the state, and the dollars coming back is the same as it was, 10 years ago now?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, there was an increase. So first of all, the fair deal for counties was something that was from a few budget cycles ago, and you're right, it has not been discussed this cycle. And your question about if that's coming through, it has to do with shared revenue, right? Shared revenue is the revenue that's supposed to be collected by the state and then divvied out to the counties, municipalities, schools, et cetera. And that has been static for a while. There has not been a real discussion about it because the last budget they passed, they allowed for some increase in shared revenue. The county, we got the tax here for the county and the city, but it was a reprieve for a very short amount of time. They have not been pushing as much this cycle to be able to have additional shared revenue. So we'll see. I have not heard much about it.
If you could, just for anybody here who might not know, when we say shared tax revenue,
Yes.
it's our taxes that go to the state, and the state is not giving it back to us
Yes.
at a fair rate.
Not us specifically, yes, that's absolutely right. Yes, the state does not share in the revenue equally. The state ends up sitting on a lot of it, and distributing to parts of the state. So we are a net giver, which is important to note. Here in Milwaukee, we give more money to the state than we get back, and that's been the case for 20 years. So, and then we have to tax ourselves to make up for the gap. So it's a problem, and I'm hopeful that that'll change in future cycles, but we have to keep pushing. Yeah.
The front page of today's Journal Sentinel said AI is here and it's our future. How do you see AI affecting politics?
So that's a really good question. So his question was and you were up earlier than me, I didn't get a chance to read my paper yet. But the cover of the Journal Sentinel says AI is here to stay, and the question is what legislators are thinking about it, what the state is thinking about it. There was a special committee on artificial intelligence that met over the last summer. I unfortunately was not on that special committee. I was one dealing with higher education and the future of higher ed in the state, which is a whole other thing. But to your question, they came up with model legislation that has not moved forward and has not been introduced in the legislature. I think, honestly, my sense of it is there's a lot of folks who hear AI and it sounds like the fashion. You know, like, you want to be for this. It's like being for the internet 20 years ago. Like, you want to be seen as being on the front end of this. And there has not been as deep of an introspective conversation about what impact that's going to have on our state. I think there's a tendency, right, we have a tendency, you hear AI and you think of like, maybe there's things that you've interacted with it, I assume. Yeah, so you might see it online. You raise your hand if you've interacted with what's called AI in some capacity in the last couple of months. What we're interacting with is not artificial intelligence, it's just what we're calling AI. And it is basically a summary of things. So where AI has been working, it's like summarizing emails or summarizing entire articles or doing predictive text. You know, to be able to say, here's a way to write an email that based off of how you've written other emails. It is not thinking, you know, it is not intelligent. It is artificial, it's not intelligent. And we are a long ways away from what artificial intelligence actually is, by definition. But what we do have is a lot of folks who are rushing to try and say, well, we need to do this because it's a part of global competitiveness. It's part of the new wave, and so we don't want to be left behind. And I feel like an old man a little bit because I feel in the Capitol, because I'm like, well, we don't know what the impacts of this are going to be, but every other technological advancement that we've ever had usually means a lot of people lose jobs. In manufacturing, in other sectors. So moving towards artificial intelligence is going to replace a lot of workers, and we don't have a plan for that, right? We still have the lowest minimum wage in the country, tied with other states that haven't adjusted their federal minimum wage, $7.25 an hour. We don't have a vast safety net for those folks to be able to fall into if there's a number of folks who start losing work as a result of it. And worse, we're actually on the side, and a lot of states are doing this, they're falling into the trap where they want to host these data centers and are offering financial incentives or, you know, bypassing our clean energy future by saying, well, we need to produce more predictable energy, is what they call it, by having methane fuel power plants. So we're having to shoulder the cost without thinking of what the impacts of it are going to be. But we have not had a deep contemplative discussion. Unfortunately, it may shock you or not to know that a lot of those conversations just don't happen at the Capitol, the deep contemplative discussions and debates about what we should be doing as a state. But that is one that I'm focused on, and if and when it does start to move forward, if they start to move forward additional incentives, then we're going to move forward with making sure that we increase the safety net, increase the minimum wage. And frankly, there's a model legislation about how to treat data centers so that they are paying for themselves, because they use a great amount of energy. So the data centers at peak, they're expected to use enough energy that would power 300,000 homes. We have less than that equivalent in the city of Milwaukee. So just to put things into perspective of what's going in. Now, that being said, one of the other things I think that's important to note about AI is that the whole industry was just flipped over earlier this year. You know about this? So China, in America, a lot of the AI was pushed as a place to plow billions of dollars of investment. And they believed that AI would work if you had to invest in a lot of large language models, which meant you had to have a ton of data. The more data you had, the more input, and the more predictive you could be. Then China came out with their model that did not require billions and billions of dollars and tons of data. Do you guys remember this? There's a lot going on.
Right.
But they came up with a model that cost millions. And they not only did that, but they publicized the model of how to do it. So it wasn't just, oh, we said we did this, but they publicized the model and basically showed all of these data companies like Google, Apple, Microsoft, Twitter is doing this too, and showed that you just spent billions and hundreds of billions of dollars on something that you could have spent millions on. And so since then, Microsoft has said that they're pausing later stages of their investment. Now, none of these major companies has come out and said, oh, our bad. We were on the wrong track. We wasted all of our investors billions of dollars because they can't do that. Otherwise, their market value would plummet. But they're all pausing in some way, shape, or form until they can figure out what to transition to. So if I'm gonna, I feel like it's a dangerous thing to stand at a podium and make a prediction. I'll do it though. I don't think the Microsoft data center is gonna come to fruition in the same way that Foxconn didn't come to fruition. A lot of it was built on expectation of this is where the market is going, we need to get ahead of it, and then reality just came in like a wave of cold water on all of it. And this is not what is sustainable. A lot of it was built with its own momentum to try and get a lot of incentives and a lot of legislators to greenlight projects that otherwise wouldn't have. So that's my take on it without having to read the article.
It's an interesting article to read though.
It is. I will check that out though, I promise you that. Yeah, Dave.
Chris, if you're trying to get ahead of some of these things, what's happening at the federal level with EPA regulations? And also the fact that the Trump administration and the relationship in Canada.
Yeah.
Great Lakes are super important to Wisconsin and the other Great Lakes states.
Yes.
What can the state do to stay ahead of maybe some issues that the feds may raise with Canada and with our own regulations on clean water, clean air, etc.?
Yeah, it's not good. So to repeat your question about where the federal, where we're at with federal regulations, specifically on EPA, and those being eroded, and then our relationship with Canada, and what the state is doing to be cognizant of that and respond. Is that
Correct.
your question? Yeah, we have our own standards too. EPA has provided standards for us. So for instance, on the amount of mercury that's acceptable in water, the amount of lead that's acceptable in water. So EPA provides those. They also provide a lot of the data to compare across states. A lot of those jobs have been decimated or are under threat. They were part of the national quote unquote buyout, right? Of saying take this leave and leave. Or take this money and leave. So that's where that's at right now. There has not been a rush of the state to try and fill in that gap. And frankly, we wouldn't be able to in a lot of the federal dollars that come into the state. So just to put this in perspective, the budget that we have as a state is $106 billion. We get $26 billion from the feds of that. State income taxes collected in the state total $21 billion. So even if every dollar that we collect from income taxes, reminder to pay your taxes, please, wouldn't cover that gap. So the feds, the best that we can do is kind of do something temporary, but where it is, these programs are going to be decimated. And in its wake, there just needs to be a response. So knowing that that's probably the outcome, should not stop you, who is probably one of the leading experts on this in the room, on what we should be doing, to speak out and push back and to say this is what the impacts of it are. Because otherwise, if the expectation is that, this is all just going to be pulled out from underneath us and we shouldn't, anticipate that or react to that, we're just going to let it happen. So I think of this as like, this is a time for us. Unfortunately, we failed the test of making sure that people understand the impacts of government and how government affects your lives. So now we have to just teach a crash course, not just me, but everybody needs to teach a crash course about what government actually does and what it means. And that means making sure that, you know, food is not poisoned, making sure your air is not, that your air is breathable, and making sure that we are not abandoning our trading partners. To your question about Canada, I mean, that's a good question. I don't know. I honestly, somebody asked me the other day, and I still don't have an answer. Who are our allies?
Well, concerned about the International Joint Commission and
Yeah.
the regulations on water diversions.
Yeah.
If we pull out of the treaty, which we may, I'm sorry,
Okay.
that could be devastating for us.
Yeah.
The Canadians are gonna withdraw water too.
Yes.
We'll take water, they'll take water.
So you're talking about the, specifically about the Great Lakes Compact.
Compact.
Great Lakes Compact.
IBC and all the.
Okay. So I have good news. So Great Lakes Compact is something that transcends federal government. So Great Lakes Compact is something where there's legislators and provincial elected officials. They get together. We got together in Duluth earlier, well, I guess it'd be a year ago now, to talk about this and to talk about the Great Lakes Compact, how it came about, and all those provisions that are in place. So those continue to be in place, and it was designed so that it was going to be enforced regardless of the federal administration that's in power. Right? This came into being we're going back 15 years now. Okay, so that's been maintained, and the laws around who can draw and getting that permission. That structure still exists, and the officials that are appointed still exist. So I think that one is still in place. Yeah, and don't feel bad if you have to go to the service. If you didn't go to the 11, you should go, because it's a good. Yes. Yeah.
I wonder if you could talk a little about what you think the future of the University of Wisconsin system will be.
Future of the University of the Wisconsin system. That's a really good question. We are not in a good place. And so right now, the UW system is getting less than 20% of its funds from the state, which is the folks who've been involved in the university system know that number. Like back when, I served with legislators who have since retired. When I was elected, I was the youngest state senator by like a decade. And I did my best to try and learn from some of my older colleagues and hear what their fights were and what they've gone through. And one of them that really floored me was back when when my friend Fred Risser, you know that name, he ended up being the oldest or the longest serving legislator in the history of not just our state, but of any state and in any elected body in the history of humanity.
A great man.
And he still took the stairs. He never took the elevator until the day he retired. And he made that promise. Anyways, he listened to him, and he was talking about how, when they started, it was 70% of the funds were coming from the state. 70%. And so these are largely state institutions.
Yeah.
And that has melted away now, so we're under 20%. So they're getting a lot of their funds from the feds. They get more of their funding from the federal government than they do from the state. The state governs them through the Board of Regents, which with rolling appointments by the governor and then the standard appointment of the superintendent of education. But they govern it, but they don't fund it. And what that means is they are more at the whim of private investors and the federal government than is comfortable, which is really dangerous because institutions of higher education they should be the stalwart defender of democratic principles. And because this is not just a story of Wisconsin, this is a story of the entire country, you see the universities flinching a lot faster than you would have otherwise. So that puts us in a very precarious state for what's going to happen. That being said, the governor did make the university funding his priority in this budget, so he did put forward additional dollars to try and make them whole. Over here at UW Milwaukee, he put funding in for the Northwest Quadrant, the old Columbia St. Mary's, to be able to make that into the School of Public Health, which is badly needed. So that's been funded in there, and it's not to the degree of what we need, the overall funding for the university isn't to the degree of what we need. That will take an even larger investment by the feds and the state, and we'll keep pushing for that. But it's a start. So,
Thank you.
yeah. Right. And then I'll go back.
Is there a good that you can see being advanced by the Republican Party, whether you agree with it or not, that you can discern?
A good being moved forward by the Republican Party is your question. I mean, I think that there are specific issues that we talk about where they're kind of at the same, where we have a common goal, it's just that they deviate quite a bit. So I could think of one about the benefit of making sure all of our kids have a good education. The problem is we never build our consensus or build our legislation based off of that. It's usually just on the periphery. And so being the ones who set the agenda, we never get to the point where there's those things that have common ground that are gonna have a huge impact. And so a lot of the things that we have that are bipartisan are things that don't have the biggest impact. So for example, like last session, most of the bills that passed, last session as in this session, most of the bills that passed have broad bipartisan consensus. So it's just that they don't have the huge impact in the world. So we're not tackling the big issues, right? I think when I was a student at UW-Milwaukee, I was conceived of this idea that we all get together and talk about what are the biggest problems that we're facing as our community and how do we solve those for our neighbors. And what ends up happening is those conversations don't happen. What fills those are the easier, sugary ones that gets the public attention that are in the news. And so sometimes we'll do those things, but usually it's a condensed version of it. So for example, we switch the penalties on what gets a misdemeanor to being something that gets a felony. And it's like, oh, we're being tougher. And my joke that's not a joke is every time we do that, I'm like, what criminal is checking the statutes before they commit a crime? You know, like if it's like, oh, we're like one of them is the getting tougher on reckless driving. And in that case, they're saying, if somebody steals a car, we're going to change it from this class of felony to this class of felony. And it's like, who is doing this? And it's supposed to be a disincentive on it. And, you know, it's like, oh yes, then they'll talk. And I'm like, people are not talking about this. That's not how people end up making these decisions. So I think who is in charge of the gavel, who's in charge will end up dictating what issues actually come up for conversation, if that makes sense. Yeah, thank you. Yes, I think we're almost up on time. So
UW-Madison used to be, I think, the top university getting grant money, I think, from the federal government, non-military. I think Johns Hopkins got the most grant money. But where are we now in terms of this proposal that grants, I think they had taken about 52% of what we had and they were going to cut it down to 30. Did that go through? And it seemed like if it does, it's really going to blow to Madison especially.
Yeah, so your question is about the grant money going to UW-Madison. I'm not familiar with, I'm not a graduate, my wife was here, she was a graduate from Madison. But I don't know how the grant dollars have changed in allocation, or what's going to be, what's changing with that specifically. So they do still get a lot of grant dollars. I'm not sure what the impact is, so I apologize not to give you a good answer on that one.
What is the path forward for the gavel change that we talked about? Meaning a democratic majority in the legislature. What needs to happen for that to happen?
Yeah, so path to gavel change is your question. The path is that so this last cycle, we don't have fair maps, we have fairer maps. So which means that our state is a 50-50 state. Don't let Tuesday fool you. We are a 50-50 state. It is just a matter of there was a huge push out. And I think that largely was a push against Elon Musk last Tuesday, but largely we're a 50-50 state, right? Last election cycle, Tammy Baldwin won at the same time as Donald Trump won, right? It was within a percentage point. Before that, Tony Evers won by the skin of his teeth. But even one statewide elected lost their position that same night, the state treasurer. And so, and that goes back, we're a 50-50 state. But even in a 50-50 election, we saw only 45% of the seats go to Democrats in the Assembly. So to get to a majority this cycle, it would have to be up to like 52, 53 statewide, which is not insurmountable. But it has to be in the right spots. So there's a number of seats where this last election, the one on Tuesday, it went way above that. So in the Assembly, they need to win 6 more seats, and in the State Senate, we need to win 2 more seats. And there's targets that are likely to turn, and if that happens, which if we have free and fair elections, which is not a given, if we have free and fair elections in the next election cycle, then and hold the governor's office, then you'd have the Assembly, the Senate, and the governor's office. And there are some seats that are close to us on that, including west of us is the 5th Senate District. South of us is the 21st, that includes Greendale, Greenfield, and Racine. Those are the 2 closest ones in the Senate, and in the Assembly, the southern part of my district, which is Oak Creek, and the Garden District or in the airport are the ones that are really on the edge, currently held by Republicans, but are really close. So that's a ways away. That election cycle kicks off in December with in April, next April of the year. So that one's full year out. So that's where that's at. So there'll be plenty of time. People are still getting over this last election before thinking about the next one, but there are folks who are thinking about that. I think I want to do one more, yes. And then I've got cards on the side, and and I'll follow up with you to be able to get a clear answer. Otherwise, you're always welcome to reach out, and I do get back to folks within 24 hours from my office. So just making sure that that's out there. Yes.
So hopefully quick 2-parter on circling back to how to make our voices heard to lawmakers in Madison, because some of us, many of us in here, and you and Ryan Clancy are our reps, and so it doesn't seem to be worth our time or yours in general to be writing. But I tried a number of years ago when Joint Finance was sitting on, $100,000 of Wisconsin Arts Board funding that they were just sitting on for 6 months. And I wrote everybody on Joint Finance, even customizing the letter to point out, American Players Theater is in your district. Crickets, except for 2 Democrats from Milwaukee on the committee. So if we don't have a lawmaker who we think needs influencing, and how do we reach out, since people don't see on Joint Finance, if you're not in their district, they don't seem to care. And the other is, like, for the budget hearings, it's so overwhelming to even know where to start. There's PFAS, there's, special education, mental health, guns, and so many of these are intractable issues right now. Do you have any suggestions on, if we were to do for the budget hearing commission, what's one that might have sway?
Yeah. So to summarize your question, it's about it sounds like you're a bit frustrated because you're represented by me and Representative Clancy, and so you feel that contacting us is not necessarily worth it because we're already on your side.
I mean, obviously at a key vote,
Yeah,
but
and joint, right,
you'll do the right thing.
Right, and Joint Finance is not responsive if you're not within their district, and that there's a whole host of different issues. You mentioned PFAS, special education, and what was the final one? Guns, I think you said guns.
Mental health, guns, you name it,
Yeah.
you just can, I don't know where to start,
Yeah, and where to start, and part of that can feel overwhelming. I think, to use a visual metaphor, sometimes I think you just have to jump off the cliff and build your wings on the way down. Because there's a lot to be doing, and all of those issues are very important. And I think it's just important to start. So you can contact me, and you should contact your representative, because the more that we hear from you, the more that we can help heighten your voice. I think a lot of times people end up excluding it either because of exactly where you're at, or if you were in a very Republican district, that you would feel the exact opposite, which is, why would I contact them if they're not going to pay attention to me? And I think your voice helps counter where other people are against, and it helps bolster and say, wait a second, there's more people who actually do agree on this. And I think good advocacy is good storytelling too. So if you have a story of how it's directly impacted you, you mentioned American Players Theater, if you have a story, if you're connected to that, that makes it that much more real. Because statistics, they just, they melt into the background, whereas a good story grabs you and puts you in that person's shoes, in your shoes, to be able to say, here's what's going on. And then if you add to that a healthy mix of facts, which is that we are the 50th out of 50 states in terms of our arts funding coming from the state, and how that could change and what impacts this ends up having. I think that's the way to try and make that difference. If you want to work with an advocacy organization, that can have a huge impact, because then you're helping to find people who are from those parts of the state where you need to contact those legislators. It's too much to do on your own. You shouldn't try to do it on your own, because you're going to get frustrated. But finding other folks who are like-minded, and there's a lot of different groups that are advocating for each of those issues. So on guns, there's Moms Demand Action, there's every
I'm
time.
on our mailing list, so
Yeah.
it's narrowing it down to what actually maybe for the budget cycle has a chance of making some movement.
Yeah, well, I would say if you have a strong opinion, push them for what their agenda should be, and the time for that is now. If they haven't already shifted to what their priorities are, and then helping to echo those, because then you're working in tandem with everybody else. And I can tell you from being at the Joint Finance hearing on Friday, the ones that we really paid attention to, you can really tell, are the ones that have a chorus, right? So they're going through and they're saying over and over again about special education reimbursement, or they're talking about arts funding, and there's been a huge hit on film specifically, because there's an office of film in the Department of Tourism that they're trying to put in place. And so by echoing that, having students talk about that, and having actors and actresses speak on that, it brings it to life. So that's a good way to elevate your voice, because then you're talking to us, but then you're talking alongside other people who are talking to their legislators that are trying to do the same thing. But the important thing is, to begin and to keep doing it, and not get, take breaks when you need to. But to realize that most of the people are on your side and want to see PFAS addressed. They want to see guns regulated in a way where we're not having so many shootings, and we want to see special education reimbursed at the same level as private ed. So, hopefully that helps. Well, thank you guys. I will. I'll hang out as long as my family allows me to.
So we thank you for your steadfastness in the face of good.